Okay, I believe we are live. So, welcome today in this lecture series, An Evening with an Expert. And we have here our esteemed speaker, Manujendra Kundu. I will give a brief introduction to him. He's the founding editor of Springer's book series titled Performance Studies and Cultural Discourse in South Asia, the decade long journalist who worked for institutions like Anandabazar Putrika and Z Media did his PhD on the third theatre in Bengal. His book titled So Near Yet So Far, Badal Sharkar's Third Theatre came out from the Oxford University Press, New Delhi in 2016. His forthcoming edited volume, titled Women Performers in Bengal and Bangladesh Caught Up in the Culture of South Asia, 1795 to 2010s, will come out from Oxford University Press. Besides being the ICSSR Fellow, he is a cultural commentator and analyst who specializes in cultural studies, performance studies, media studies, Tagore studies, and the intellectual history of India. So we have here Manujendra Kundu, and his topic for today's talk is the myriad homes and challenges for women performers. An overview. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for having me today. I really appreciate this. As you say that today the title of my presentation is The Myriad Homes and Challenges for Women Performers, an overview. Uh, Today I'm going to talk from the introduction to my forthcoming edited volume titled Women Performers in Bengal and Bangladesh, Caught Up in the Culture of South Asia, 1795 to 2010s. This has been excerpted from the longish introductory note. Here I have tried to see whether women's marginalization as performers can be simultaneously looked at through the works of non-performers who may or may not be from noble families and performers from noble and or ignoble families. So far, to the best of my knowledge, the scholarship around South Asian performances has not studied these areas together. I think when we talk about Bhadra Mohila's crisis, we cannot leave fallen women outside our purview and vice versa. When I use fallen women, it is always within the inverted commas. Similarly, Hindu and Muslim women's agency cannot be studied in isolation, although religion distinguishes their identities, which might seem to be very different. Here I have done that as well. This is just an attempt in that direction. Although the discussion focuses on Bengali women's marginalization, some of the women discussed here are national figures, yet the issues dealt with have a pan Indian significance. Many of the problems were or are still relevant to the other parts of India. So let's begin. In this discussion, the objective is to conflate the intellectual exercises of the Bhadra Mohila, that is, gentlewoman, writers, thinkers, activists, and women performers, thinkers, both Bhadro, that is gentle, and fallen, in concatenation. At the outset, the idea might seem implausible, but a deeper look into the issues that the performers and non performers had or had been dealing with would reveal that home or domesticity was the real challenging space, which was the reason for their angst, anguish, and also the point of departure to question patriarchy. And when I say performers, I mean here one who labors for an audience as an entertainer and or the one who is an artistic preceptor. And when I say non-performers here, I mean those who belong or belong to other types of social political agencies and also influence or influenced cultural artistic performances through various industrious performances or processes. Home or domesticity, which is traditionally considered to be a place of refuge, sanctity, and security, and yet is the epicenter of unsettling tremors and the central nervous system that controls most of the constructive precarious functions of body and mind, is not limited to the place of abode only, but extended beyond to the workplace as home, away from home, where colleagues are to be treated as extended family members. Yet, neither the workplace is a home nor the colleagues are family members, with rare exceptions. This sanctimonious inconsistency of domesticity, which is the sinew of public and private spaces, discomposed Bengali women for more than 2 centuries, that is 1795 to our time. The trials and tribulations of women performers, therefore, have to be read together with the challenges of writer, activist, reformer, and performer, and not in isolation. In an article titled Griho, that is home, Begum Rokeya Sakhawat Hussain discussed the wretchedness of women in Muslim and Hindu families to draw the inference that most Indian women were deprived of happiness at home. Quote, everyone has a home except us, unquote. Khairun Nisa, I quote, opined that female backwardness was the root of societal decline. A household in which women are not happy will never prosper. Unquote. In her lamentations, Rashusundari Devi wrote, like quote, such a state of misery for being a woman, I am as if incarcerated like a thief. But for that is even learning an offense? Unquote. She compared her domesticated life with Jatra or Pala, and herself with an actress in different roles and characters, which had been assigned to her by her god for that Jatra or Pala. We must remember that here is a woman who was not at all acquainted with Western writings, yet the quotidian experiences can or could turn a writer, activist, reformer, and even a housewife into a performer. Rashasundari Devi's autobiography pointed our attention to that highly advanced and sophisticated concept way back in the 19th century with her thief like presence at home. Mahmuda Khatun, an educated Bhadramohila, reminisced her experience behind Parda thus. I quote, I was put in Parda at the age of 12 and taken out of school, but the world outside was so irresistible that I would ramble in the garden whenever I could. Unquote. Her words are almost identical with those of the Potita, performer Noti Binodini, Potita meaning fallen woman. I quote, my nature had become such that if we were visiting a garden, I did not care for the house, but went looking for a lonely spot surrounded by wild plants and flowers. I often slipped out of the house and went off far away to spend my time in solitude. Unquote. The title of Manada Devi's autobiography is itself an interesting one, Shikkhita Patitar Atmacharita, autobiography of an educated fallen woman, where she blamed her forsaken childhood for her debauchery and dissolute life choices. In fact, the career of most of the women performers, who would also be stigmatized as fallen women, would not have started at all had they not gone out of their homes for livelihood. It was home that forced them out of domesticity and compelled them to take refuge in a precarious professional home of greater uncertainty, where there was money but no respect. In the attempts of P.C. Joshi, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of India, at straitjacketing the political will to engage in political activities other than the cultural activities at the IPTA of Ribarai Chundhuri or Priti Bandopadhyay and the like, many of whom did not feel like rehearsing long hours all the time sitting at home and pigeonholing them as only cultural activists in the IPTA. We understand that Reva or Priti idealize their workplace as home, but their leader, employer or leader, that is PC Joshi, did not reciprocate like a family member. In recent times, the wars of Tulika Das, who broke away from the renowned theatre group Bohurupi, and the founding member of the Bohushar theatre group, echo Reba's feeling and the proposition here. On the rift with the theatre group Bohurupi and departure from the group, Tulika Das says, and I quote, "We left our house, actually, our house, our temple, our life." Unquote. We must remember here that the fallen women in socially acceptable popular cultural practices like theatre not only came to explore these areas for monetary purposes and reap the benefit of this space for attracting rich and influential clientele elsewhere because their fame would help them attract rich clients to sustain as prostitutes as well. But with time, these practices and spaces also defined civility, respectability, social prestige to them. It was difficult for them to ignore the ideological baggage of Bhadrata, that is civility, of high class, caste, Varna women, whereas the fallen women of unacceptable popular culture did not perhaps care much about Bhadro or Bhadro, civil uncivil polarity. Even in the performative parlance, sometimes home appeared as the innuendo about oppression and societal critique. I'm quoting a few rhymed lines from one article by Sumanta Banerjee, although the translations are mine. আমার ভালোবাসা আবার কোথায় বাসা বেঁধেছে, মাসে মাসে বাড়ছে ভাড়া, বাড়িউলি দিচ্ছে তারা. My love has nested in another home. Room rent has been increasing every month. The rentier lady has been pushing for a hike. ভাত দেবার নাম নেই কিলমারার গোসাই. No signs of providing me with rice, only beatings are in store. দরবারে না মুখ পেয়ে ঘরে এসে মাঠ ঠেঙায়. Losing prestige at the darbar, he beats up wife at home. ঘর পড়লে ছাগলে মারায়, রাঁড় হলে সবাই এসে সাঙ্গা করতে চায়. No treats on the fallen home, but everyone wants to marry a woman when she is a prostitute. In these examples, the words basha, that is home or house, bhat, that is rights, ghore or ghor, at home or house, are signs of the speaker's belief in domestic peace and protection, aspersions in the absence of it, and the state of consternation. As the receptacles of phallocentric squalidness, these conflicting ideas of home could not escape the attention of those ostracized women performers, whose being and expression became the targets of disparagement by the Bhadralok culture. In the writings of Bengali women, home comes with a conflicting rendition, a cover, security, peace, piety, freedom, as well as bondage, insecurity, misgiving, profanity, and unfreedom. More so because to most of the Bhadramohila housewives, home was or is a place of residence, a workplace, and a house of correction, which continues to be as such not just in the sense of prison, but as an address for changes that makes someone more accurate than one was before. This constant tension of the opposite makes home a challenging and contentious space, a vortex of polarity for both Bhadramohila and public or fallen woman, performer and non-performer alike, often blurring the personal and professional speciality by infringing upon one another. We also have to remember that the home does not necessarily constitute a similar concept for the Bhadramohila and public woman, because the latter's intellectual exercises not only did not gain currency among the Bhadralok, but also failed to garner support from the educated Bhadramohila, who had, as Shumanta Banerjee said, internalized the male concepts of the new womanhood. Therefore, home also becomes a contested site of convergence and divergence vis-à-vis their respective class positions. Bhadrata was or is another aspect that complicated and continues to enmesh and entangle women's position, a queer combination of scriptural tenets and the colonial learning process brought about a crossbreed conception of bhadrata of women entailing shutitto, pativrotto, that is devotion and faithfulness of a wife to her husband and chastity, brahmacharya, celibacy, especially for widows, and education, exploration of the public domain, social activities, etc., the trope of which the fallen women of the performance entertainment world could not even escape. While education, social activities, etc., of women are or were expendable, Shutitto, Pativrotto, and Brahmacharya are or were non negotiable. We might remember that the Bhadramahila's education and their free mixing with the opposite sex in public places were not at all welcomed by society. Not to talk about the Bhadra and public women performers. It was not easy for them to enter these spheres. Women's learning was considered to be ominous, therefore, non learning was homely, chaste, pious, and devotional. From the second half of the 19th century, the attitude would just be the opposite among a section of Bhadra progressive families, which would become the touchstone for ideal, progressive, advanced, and modern companion housewife. Yet, even now, Bengali women performers' labor or engagement is seen as secondary, inconsequential, unnecessary, and dispensable in many instances. A proper 10 to 5 job is a rather appreciable act of Bhadro Shobho engagement in middle class Bengali families. Here, Shobho is polite, mannerly, elegant, civilized, courteous, etc. Therefore, the questions pertaining to the difference between Bhadrata and Abhadrata is opposite of Bhadrata, demure and decadence, modesty and depravity were and have been the colonial baggage that continue to settle and unsettle women's psyche and social position. The most advanced progressive representatives of society can or could not avoid these uneasy issues even after critiquing them. Of course, the modes of Bhadrata have evolved with time, but with only a few exceptions. The basics remain the same vis-a-vis women's approach to the self and men's construction of women, which can be understood through office culture, television soaps, advertisements, hard and entertainment news by and on women, cliched films, religious festivals, political rhetoric, etc. A circularity of double helix of Shastriya, that is related to Shastra, or religious customs and westernized liberty has been at play constantly in determining the place of women in recent times. With the rise of aggressive and acute fundamentalism, a spate of retrogressive Shastriya or religious ideas has gained strong ground at every social level. Home, civility, spirituality, etc., have bearing on Bengali women's sexuality even now. The 19th century upper caste, Kayastho Brahmin, male unrest over the position of widows and wives was an aperture to restrict women's sexuality by making every home a house of correction. Because widowhood and polygamy open the possibility for women to explore their sexuality, albeit surreptitiously, often leading to the termination of their stay at parental or spousal homes and inception of life at the religious homes, that is, akhara, or at red light districts' houses, or at other people's houses as maidservants, being relegated to the position of fallen women. Some of these women would insinuate again into the private parts of the Bhadra family in the garb of performers, transgressing the homily on feminine correctness of Kulabodhu, that is, housewife, and some would infiltrate into the sacred conjugal relationship of Bhadrabadi that is civil or respectable house, by attracting colonial men through their regulated, sophisticated, sober, arty sexuality. The latter's physical grace and or oof attracted the Bhadramohila to the performance space for the educative nature of the body of entertainment, transmuting the performers into purveyors of certain ideas and qualities of the respectable woman through their male preceptors and impresarios. However, the uncertainty of the fallen or public woman's career, the transience of her physical beauty on the one hand, yet the educative qualities of their work or labor in some cases, the sexual rivalry between Bhadramohilas and these women, and the inability to get rid of them for Bhadramohila's husbands' intransigent promiscuity on the other, place both the fallen or public women performers and Kulobodhu in a precarious situation. Often it would turn out to be a rivalry between an unrestricted, unprotected, unbridled, revolting celebration of sexuality and suppressed, regulated, objectified, purposeful, joyless, run of the mill, coital experience. Yet both had a profound sense of consternation and existential crisis for the presence of the same man. For Bhadramohila, the crisis deepened with the absence of choice in selecting their partners and the existence of co-wives, trysts, and for the other, the choice of their sexual partner was entirely their own. While the public fallen women were the visible results of libertine men, the precarity of housewives was also evinced by the depravity of their husbands. Hence, women of both categories had to live between the extremities of home, chastity, celibacy, or fallen state, cognition, sobriety, sophistication, or unsavoriness, therefore degeneration. Although deprivation brought them closer, the Bhadramohila would either nurture hostility against their co-wives and the fallen women performers, or acquiesce the situation by following customs, or try to compete with them by concentrating on fashion, coiffure, fineries, education, lessons in handcraft, etc., for acceptance and getting closer to their men. Similarly, the fallen woman performer had to train themselves to look attractive or make themselves marketable to their preceptors and their male clientele. Kailash Mashini Devi rightly observed, and I quote, "Beauty is the only weapon of women. Men can achieve success by virtue of education and knowledge, but women do not have such a possibility." Here we may recall the words of K.N. Kabraji, the founder of Parsi Gayan Uttejak Mandali, who, and I quote, inveighed against the low class prostitutes who had co opted music and urged middle class married women to learn music so their husbands did not have to leave their homes at night in search of musical entertainment. Unquote. Both Bhadro and fallen women, therefore, had to sell something to their men, refined, learned, exercised, and practiced sexuality. No wonder that when a marital relationship is terminated or convoluted beyond recovery, the Bengali saying is ghar bhanga, the breakage of home. Here, ghar denotes the relationship. As in Indian religious matrices, the spate of 19th century political social diatribes in Bengal centered around the idea of controlling the body, which was publicly translated into the regulation of the body politic, and at the personal private level, the manipulation and occupation of the body of an individual, especially women, by playing around with, that is, imposing and abolishing several social religious mores. The Indian concept of dharma is the political entity that was underpinned chiefly and almost solely by the idea of the subjection and appropriation of the body, therefore sexuality, and hence the mind. The political discourse from the 19th century considering it as the starting point in modern times until our times, has not changed much. But the Bhadra Mahila would not always remain silent on her sexual choices. Nawab Faizul Nisa Chaudhurani, who oversaw her own zamindari, set up a girls' school, left her husband for polygamy, and refused the title Begum for the non-gendered one of Nawab, did not hesitate to draw a frank sexual imagery with a flavor of the Islamic Hindu syncretistic ethos of rural Bengal in her 19th century literary work Roop Jalal, which is credited as the first full-length book in modern times by a Bengali Muslim woman. In the writings of Anindita Devi, Taslima Nasrin, and others, we sense an urge to emancipate women's sexuality. In her novel Swarolipi, Savitri Roy, who was the wife of a CPI member, did not bother to experiment with the demure desire of a woman. Bhadrata might have restrained women writers from being overexpressive about their sexuality, but their gradual frankness was still not received well by the Bengali society. The spillover of homey relationships into the public spaces and formal semi formal relationships, thereby extending the home beyond the home, complicated human relationships beyond recovery, dragging the familial obligations, relationships into the outer spaces where there are no actual familial ties, deepened the psychological problems and often imbues with incestuous relationships. Thus, the Bengali and Indian home was or is prevalently pervert in nature, where woman paid or pays the highest price. When I say the Bengali and Indian home was or is prevalently pervert in nature, I mean to say that extension of the names of personal relationships like Baba, Ma, Bhai, Bon, Dada, Kaka, Jatha, Didi, Dada, etc. into the public space. One can say that this is certainly the case of tradition and custom in order to view non personal relationships as personal ones. But when we, especially women, suffer setbacks, racial and or professional sexual politics that make the situation even worse, it is a question of trust and breach of trust that I am talking about. There was a time when calling someone Dada or Didi actually tied two human beings beyond sexual relationships. But now the situation is not as such. It is merely customary. It is like calling someone as Mr. X or Miss Y. If that is the case, why do we have to call someone Dada or Didi? Because that is the custom, knowing fully well that we may not trust the other person. But if in certain cases a sense of dependence grows, the shock deepens beyond recovery. It is like, well, I trusted this man. I even called him Dada, Bhaiya, Tau, or Chacha, or whatever be the case, and yet he did this to me. Whereas people with these personal names in an ideal situation are supposed to protect, take care, and love, but in reality, they are doing just the opposite. If the question is about sexual exploitation, then the psychological crisis deepen further. And for these reasons, I say that Bengali and Indian home, personal home or professional, was or is prevalently pervert in nature. I must clarify that here the exposition of home is different from Partha Chatterjee's arguments on Ghar and Bahir, that is, the home and the world, vis-a-vis women's position. Notwithstanding the significance and implications of the inner outer distinction, material spiritual dichotomy, largely influenced by the discourse of nationalism, I would like to emphasize home as the treacherous terrain beyond nationalistic framework. In all the above senses, I argue it was or is the Bengali man who was or is the actual homemaker, that is, the maker of the home. The woman was or is nothing more than a caretaker who has been following the guidelines or a model code of conduct drawn up by man to protect his home. A home That is the repository of firm yet fluid relationships, a stable institution of a deep rooted yet uncertain establishment called family, a palpable container of concrete yet impalpable human to human norms. The terms and conditions of this home vary from place to place, agents to agents, and purpose to purpose. It is the political economy of familial structure, interpersonal management, budgeting and accounting, the territory of defense, site of planning and conspiracy. Yet, it is also a story of women's struggle and negotiating strategies through ups and downs. This presentation, which does a walkthrough of performance politics or politics in performance from a queer, off the beaten path, must be seen as a prototype of the developing scholarship in this area. Some of you must be wondering what these all have to do with performance politics or politics in performance or the performers. To clarify it further, I want to draw your attention to those examples of performers already mentioned before, whose life and challenges were akin to those of the so called non performers. I just want to give two examples which may prove my point. One was Kya Chakraborty, who wrote a very brief article which may be best described as a short note titled Mrs. R.P. Sengupta, where she shows us her own situation where she was relegated to the position of Mrs. R.P. Sengupta, that is, Mrs. Rudra Prasad Sengupta, and not Kya Chakraborty, and how her everyday life had turned her into a housewife, hindering her creative pursuits. You know that she was married to Nandikar's Rudra Prasad Sengupta. The second one is a statement at a Seagull colloquium by theatre personality Chandra Dostidar. I quote, from our childhood, we have been taught that women will always learn to adjust. However insurmountable the task, we would always learn to adjust. This process of adjustment that we learn at home, we bring with us when we come to theatre, and there too we adjust. It is a long process of adjusting and compromising until we reach a point when we suddenly realize, no, we don't like it anymore. Yes, it's true, we still adjust at home, but in the theatre we feel why should we adjust any longer? Those of us who cannot fit in silently leave the group, but we never take a stand and protest and ask, in what way am I less than any man? The power to say no, to protest, was usurped way back in our childhood, when the courage to be forthright was lost in the overwhelming dictates of propriety meant exclusively for women, which is why the ability to stand up and speak out has taken us women very long. The manner in which I have adjusted, compromised endlessly, or the manner in which I am still continuing to adjust, I don't think that my daughter will ever do that. Before I conclude, suffice it to say, perhaps, that without a comprehension of the convoluting paradigm called home, entailing a socio-political, psychosexual, cultural, economic trajectory, the understanding of women as performers may elude us. Since, after all, the making of performers as that of other social beings is contingent on these factors, I think we have to realize and penetrate the performance politics by cleaving through this elongated trajectory as much as possible. Otherwise, it may defeat the purpose of studying performers without educating ourselves on the social constructs. As I said in the beginning, that this is just a very short excerpt of a long introductory article. Therefore, many aspects and examples of a wide range of performance trajectory could not be covered here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful lecture. It is now time for question and answer session. Um, we have, I think, a few questions. Uh, there is one question. Uh, how do we position the vector of caste in this discourse?
I have already mentioned that the uh, caste, not only caste, class, and varna, uh, which is reproduced as savarna in English academic articles. I think the word savarna is a wrong usage. However, uh, I have already discussed the impact of class, caste, and varna. Uh, Actually, the religious idea or the ideas around religion were based on class, caste, or varna, which not only differentiated people who belong to Hindu religion, but also it became a very important point of departure, if I may say so, to distinguish between people of the upper class people, but also it was a deciding factor when we study the fallen women performers or fallen women. It is uh, in Manuda Devi's autobiography, that is Shikhita Patitar Atmacharito, the thing is also there. I mean, there was a hierarchy between the fallen women as well. So it actually influenced or impacted on uh, the performance trajectory as well. Mm, yeah.
Thank you, sir, for your answer. Uh, I don't think we have any other uh, questions. So I think we should move on to the uh, vote of thanks. Um, so, good evening, everybody. I'm really honored and privileged to have this opportunity to deliver the vote of thanks for today's lecture on behalf of the Department of English, Kokla Memorial Girls College, Kolkata. First of all, I want to extend my sincere gratitude to our eminent guest speaker, Dr. Manujendra Kundu, for delivering such a brilliant lecture on the myriad homes and challenges for women performers, an overview. As part of our ongoing year long lecture series, An Evening with an Expert. And in his scholarly lecture, Dr. Kundu has discussed some of the issues associated with the female performers in theatre, the socio-cultural and economic context within which they were and they should be placed, their ideological stances, their motives, the political ramifications of their actions, some aspects of resistance in their performance, their deployment of sexuality, and their move towards emancipation, but also the limitations of such enterprise. So, thank you, sir, for accepting this invitation and for delivering this lecture. Uh, Next, I express my gratitude to our chief patron, the Lady Principal of our college, Dr. Atushi Karfa, for her continuous encouragement and valuable guidance. I thank with all my heart our head of the department, Mr. Rajkumar Borman, without whose leadership and unconditional support, organizing such a large uh, event and with such continuing success would not have been possible. I sincerely thank my colleague Durba Mukherjee, for doing such a wonderful job as the anchor of this event. In fact, I must express my gratitude to all my colleagues, the faculty members of my department, and the entire college as well. Last but not least, I thank all our students for being there and for supporting this enterprise. After all, it is for the benefit of our students that we have organized this lecture series. And I thank all our viewers who will be listening to this lecture right now or will listen to it in future, no doubt. So thank you once again. So
Thank you very much once again for giving me the opportunity to attend this session.
thank you, sir.